We thought it was going to be a quiet night. Saw some individuals run out of that house, and my boss came up to me and said, "Hey, let's wrap these guys up." We walked right into their ambush, right into what we call the kill zone, and literally they opened up on us. I took a round off my gun. I had my left night vision tube shot off. I thought my arm got shot off in the moment. The guys said they saw me stand up and turn and run to them when the round hit me from behind. It caught me right in front of the ear and traveled through. So they saw me fall in front of them and thought I was dead.
At that moment, were you conscious?
In the gunfight, when I was laying there, what I remember was, I was thinking about what I'd been trained to do, but then I kind of realized, like, bro, you're out of the fight. Like, you know, your job is to survive. That's it. I remember trying to move my right hand at one point, and I couldn't even feel my right hand. I was really cold. It was getting hard to think. So like, I was like, you're dying. Like, you're going through all the physiological components. I'm dying. So I called out to God and I said, "Hey, I need your strength. I need to go home. I want to see my wife and kids again." Immediately upon that prayer, I had strength.
Welcome back to the Mulligan Brothers podcast. Today's episode is with Navy SEAL Jason Redman. We spent the day with Jason and his family and seeing the incredible work that he's been doing with his business. But more importantly, we got to hear his life story. The moment that Jason's life changed forever, told like he's never told it before. Jason was under heavy fire whilst at war and received a bullet through the arm that almost blew his whole arm off, and also received a bullet through the face. And in this incredible story of survival and growth and change and working on himself after the fact, we learned so many lessons. This was an absolute honor to sit down with Jason and talk about this. Today's podcast was powered by HUEL. I am drinking their Black Edition at the moment. I'll tell you a little bit more about this later on in the video, but they're also offering a discount code. So if you go to the pinned top comment, you can get £10 or $15 off your first order, and it's available for 72 hours. And if the code is expired, there's also exclusive offers down below. Let's dive into this amazing video with Jason Redman. Just for the audience so they know, so we deliver an interview and a documentary. So for the interview, just to let them know where we are in this room right now, you've just said that it's poetic in some ways because it's under construction, which is, you know, something that you've said your life is like. But where are we? What's the location and what's the intentions of the building that we're in at the moment?
So we're in Chesapeake, Virginia, where I live, and this is Riverview Center, the new business and building that my wife and I bought back in December with a vision of having a place not only for our office, but a place where individuals could come work, create, network, collaborate. And all of the building is done. This is the final unfinished space, which is the heart of the building for us, which is the event center. You know, we will have a deck and sliding doors that go out onto the deck, and just beautiful views of the water and the marshlands that capture a lot of what coastal Virginia looks like.
It's gorgeous. Like, the location's absolutely amazing. I didn't realize you'd only moved in here in December. You've worked fast. Like, I thought you'd been here for a year or two, like trying to get this together. So not long at all.
No, not long at all.
Wow.
Yeah, we closed December 22nd, and we're really fortunate. Big shout out to my contractor, Don. I mean, he did an amazing job in about 2 months, renovated the building, all new paint, all new floors, fixed things, knocked out a few walls, upgraded stuff. And yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a cool space to be around.
Yeah.
Really cool.
It's really nice.
So what we usually ask at the start of an interview is, for those who don't know, just introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself, what you do.
Yeah, I am Jason Redman. I am a retired Navy SEAL. I am an author, speaker, coach, and entrepreneur.
What was the journey from, you know, childhood, growing up, into a look towards going into the military?
Yeah, I grew up in a divided family, if you will. I mean, like many kids, my parents divorced when I was young, about 3 years old. So not that it was super tumultuous or, violent or anything like that. I mean, my parents separated for the most part on relatively amicable terms. But it did create a little bit of chaos as kids because, it turned into the separation and, hey, on the weekends we're going to mom, and during the week with dad, and all those different things. And as they both moved, my mom moved to a location, my dad moved to a location. So we just moved around a lot when I was younger and kind of bounced back and forth between the two of them. The military thing was something that came from a very young age. I always had a affinity towards what I call the protector community, the fire, military, law enforcement, all those things. When I was really young, my parents tell a story about how I wanted to be a firefighter. I would say, I want to be a fireman because firemen are brave of heart. I would tell people that. And I guess they were like, I was super obnoxious because someone gave me this fire helmet that had a light on it and a siren, and I would like wear that around the house and drive everyone insane. But probably, I don't know, maybe younger years, 7, 8, I started to lean towards the military. My family had all served. So I grew up with a lot of stories about the military from my both grandfathers on my dad's side and my mom's side had served. I didn't fully understand. I didn't, know all my history back then, but my grandfather on my mom's side, they were born in France. And my grandfather fought with the French during World War II. And then after World War II, they moved to Canada and then later down into the United States. Whereas on my dad's side, my dad's father was a B-24, a bomber pilot over the European theater during the war. And those guys' life expectancy was not very good. I mean, he flew all 25 missions, highly decorated. I remember reading newspaper articles. There was an amazing article that he earned the Distinguished Flying Cross where they were shot down, and I don't know why they didn't or couldn't bail out, but he crash landed in a snowfield in Yugoslavia, and everyone survived. And they evaded back to friendly lines in Italy, and he got the Distinguished Flying Cross for that, which is a pretty high medal for aviators. So, and 7 air medals and all these things. And I never got to meet him. I just heard stories about him. He ended up passing away before I came along. And then my dad was in the Army. So I had all these stories of military, and it was just something I wanted to do from a young age. I heard about the SEAL teams when I was about 15. I started becoming interested in special operations and special forces, Rangers and Green Berets. And my dad had been a airborne instructor, and he was a rigger, meaning he packed parachutes. And all the way up until probably 2000, Navy SEALs went through airborne school through the Army, including me. I went through in 1995 or 1996, January 96, I went through Army Airborne School. So my dad, going back into the 60s, had SEALs who came through airborne school with him. And when I was a young kid in the late 80s, or, 12, 13, 14, you couldn't find anything about the SEAL teams. Obviously, the internet hadn't been invented yet. God, does that make me sound old? So really, it was just trying to find information. It was very hard to find anything. But my dad said, hey, you should check these guys out. They're called Navy SEALs. They're considered some of the best of the best. Their training is the hardest in the world. And I don't know why, that just piqued my interest at a high level. And an interesting fact is, I was not like this super athlete or this great big strapping kid who was, a black belt in anything. I was a runt. I was, definitely did not blossom until late in my life, probably 18, 19, did I probably reach my full potential with my height and growth. And back when I was 14, I literally was like the 95-pound weakling. I was more interested in playing pretend than going and doing real things. So a lot of people, when I said, man, I'm going to become a SEAL, I was like a laughing stock. And I don't know why. It was like a tipping point in my life. Like, I'm going to prove to you that I have the ability to do this. And I just locked onto it, and I never looked back from that moment. And I decided, well, man, if I'm going to be a SEAL, I should go do hard things. So I went out for the football team, and I started wrestling, and I started doing all these things. I started working out. But I never lost sight of that goal. That was my goal. And I was never dissuaded from it. When I first went to the recruiting office in a small town in North Carolina, Lumberton, North Carolina, the recruiter literally laughed me out of the office. Like, you'll never be a SEAL. Look at you, you're a scrawny runt, like, beat it. And chased me out of the office multiple times. Kept coming back. And ultimately, that recruiter left. A new recruiter came in by the name of Henry Horn, Petty Officer Henry Horn. And Henry was like, hey, man, if you want to be a SEAL, let me help you. And he did. He helped me down that path. And pretty cool. Probably 2 or 3 years ago, I finally found Henry Horn and got to reunite with him down in North Carolina and just thank him and say, hey, man, I wouldn't be a SEAL if it wasn't for you helping me down this path. But I don't know why. I had all kinds of people tell me I'd never make it. And it fueled a fire within me to make it.
Is there a story that stands out when you say you were 95 pounds small and people were like ridiculing you for the idea of being in the SEALs? Like, was there something that stands out in particular? Like, we spoke earlier about, you grew up having to face bullies and having to deal with people looking down on you because you were so small.
I got bullied multiple times in school. I mean, I remember probably in 7th grade, I got stuffed into a trash can. I remember when I started playing football, there was a day where I played a receiver and a cornerback. And they were working on a play, and I kept disrupting the play. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. It wasn't that I was this amazing football player. But it really started to piss off the offense, and specifically some of the guys on the offensive line. I made up for my lack of size by probably being loud and a smart ass, and, which oftentimes really rubbed people the wrong way. I look back on that now. So I think probably a lot of people thought I was annoying. And I think that's kind of what happened that day. I started to try and rub it in the face. Here I am, I'm disrupting this play. And man, they turned it into like, let's kill this guy. And the coach just kind of let it happen. And I will say it was a good moment for me, because it also was it was a little bit of an overcome moment, if you will, because I would not back down. And man, I was getting literally the snot knocked out of me. And I would just get back up and try and do it again. And it taught me a lesson in perseverance, and that, hey man, you don't have to be the biggest, you don't have to be the strongest. Like, heart and a will to drive forward can carry you so far in this life. Because the assistant coach came up to me afterwards and he just said, hey man, I just want to tell you, he said, that was one of the best examples of heart I've seen on the field in a long time. So, just many moments like that kind of occurred as I was a young man. I started to become popular probably my senior year, but up until that point, I was kind of a nerd. I definitely was not in the in crowd in any way. I think I, by sheer force of will, got myself into the in crowd. And some of that had to happen, or happened just because, I started flexing my independence. I got kicked out of the house by my parents, by my dad. I was living with my dad and stepmom and really was butting heads with them. And my dad, I was really butting heads hard with my stepmom. My dad was like, hey, look, she's my wife. You're going to be gone in another couple of years. So I'm not picking between the two of you. So you're out. So I ended up going and living with my sister, and in some ways it was good. Gave me some freedom to grow. It also taught me some responsibility because I had to go get a job. I worked actually 2 jobs while I was still going to school, while still training and trying to focus on being a SEAL. But I think it also taught me to fit in a little more, because by the time I was a senior and this had happened, like I was hanging out with some of the cool kids, and so it was an interesting, but my sole focus really was I want to be a SEAL, and everything kind of led to that, and that's what kept me out of trouble for the most part. I was hanging out with some people who, were doing things that, drugs and some criminal activity. They kind of ran with some gangs in the area where we lived, and I thought that was cool, like many young, impressionable young men. But I was smart enough to not, I knew that if I got myself in trouble, I would not be able to go in the Navy, and I knew it would impact my security clearance. So I was smart enough to dabble in it, very low level, but not ever to really get myself in trouble. And then, left and went on to the Navy and started driving forward from there.
Wow. So the being small and sort of overlooked and wanting to prove people wrong, is there anything else to that? Was it just the fact that you were a little bit smaller than everybody else? Or was there anything else, like trying to prove yourself?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I wasn't the most athletic person. I learned later as I developed better that I had pretty good speed, hand speed and things like that when I did some training later. But for the most part, I think as I get older, I think I'm starting to recognize that I think all of us carry the scars of our youth and lessons that's impacted on us. So I think some of it is inferiority complex. And you try and make up for it by accomplishments and proving and, whatever things. We used to joke about big trucks with big tires, and I had one of those. And people used to say, oh, you're making up for something. And I don't know, maybe I was. So yeah, I think I always felt like, hey, I need to prove myself in this life, and always like, hey, I got to be at the next level. Hey, I got to be, first if I can, or, at the highest level I can be. So that drove me pretty relentlessly. And in some ways it was good. I think like a lot of successful people, an insecurity can really drive you to be successful. The downside is I get older, and it's only, I don't know, it's only really recently that I feel like I'm starting to appreciate this. It's also a hard way to live your life. I feel like I drag 1,000-pound weight behind me everywhere I go, and it's the ghost of Jason Redman past. And like, I'm trying to always prove that I'm better than that guy. Which leads to all kinds of, it's funny, I often talk to other people, hey man, don't compare. We all compare. We live in this comparison world. We live in a world that has built itself on a platform of likes and views, and, success is driven by how much you're in the spotlight and what level of impact you have. And the rational side of me can take a step back and say, wow, you really done well. But the irrational side of me, the ghost of the past, says, yeah, you'll never be there. You're just that guy. So those are things that as I get older, I'm working on.
I mean, I subscribe to the same thing. Like, I really do. When I achieve this, it'll be all good. And then you get there and you set the bar somewhere else, and you keep moving forward. Do you think you've got it figured out? Obviously, you've got an awareness. Do you think you can move past it, or?
No, I actually hired a therapist to help me.
Because obviously we're sat here right now.
I'm this, you know, and this never once will I ever say, hey, don't, you know, this is not woe is me. You know, I've done very well, and I'm thankful and grateful. I have so many friends. I mean, I'm making an impact, and like I said, the rational side of me recognizes that, and I'm thankful for that, and I will never change that. But I also recognize that it's a hard way to live your life. Like, to always, you know, it's funny, man. I'm so positive to everyone else, but I'm not to myself. Like, I'm the hardest on myself. I'll tear myself apart in a second. Like, you're not speaking on that stage because you're not good enough. You know, you don't look like a SEAL. That's the reason they don't want to hire, which is a myth. It's a lie. Somebody who said it to me the other day. It's a conspiracy theory in my mind. But though I'm beginning to learn that's the biggest hurdle. And it's funny. I've been super successful, but what I want to get to is the ghost of Jason Redman is gone, and I'm very happy with the real me, who is an amazing person, who's done amazing things, who's achieved great successes, but for some reason, you know, there's, you know, a past part of me. And I know I'm not the only one. I know there's millions of, probably a billion people out there that feel the same way. And it's really hard in this day and age. We live in a world that is pushing more and more for this level of perfection. It's what you see in social media. You got to have the perfect body. You got to have the perfect job. You got to make this much money. You got to have the perfect family. You know, you got to drive the perfect car. And if you don't achieve those things, then, you know, you're not a good person. And I even run in circles in the entrepreneur space that it's like, if you're not grinding all the time, you're never going to make it. So, you know, that becomes a thing where you're like, oh my God, if I stop or if I enjoy myself, you know, you feel guilty. Like, oh my God. But a lesson that I already know, every one of us is going to die. So there is a balance here. Everybody should drive to be successful and try and become the best version of themselves, but that becomes the crux. How do you figure out what the best version of yourself is and be content with that?
That is so tough, and you're right. I think the humbling of we're going to die, it doesn't make striving for something worthless, but it does mean that, you know, spending time with your loved ones and making sure that you have some kind of contentment on this earth whilst you're here is also a part of it as well. But it's so hard to balance. I think when you know, you've done this for, did you say 49 years?
2 weeks, I turned 49.
And like, you've been striving for success and pushing for, you know, achieving goals, and you've taught your body to become this like goal achieving machine. And now to say that maybe your happiness doesn't lie in that is just...
I think it's there. I mean, don't get me wrong. For anybody out there who believes, I think humans are built to accomplish things. I think we're just made this way. You know, if you believe in God or not, no matter what, I think humans feel good when we accomplish tasks. I don't care who you are. I don't care what task it is. If you're playing a video game, you feel good when you reach the next level. Obviously, if you do something hard outside, if you know, plant a garden and, you know, you dug it out and did all this, you feel good when you're done and you look at it. I mean, I think we are goal driven individuals. Sometimes do we create this perfect world where people are chasing something that would be the equivalent of me if I just decided like, hey man, I want to be an NFL lineman. I'm never going to be an NFL lineman. There's no amount of food, steroids. There is no program on this planet that will ever build me to be an NFL lineman. It is an absolutely insensible, ridiculous goal. Can I be an A-level speaker? I hope so. You know, I'm not there yet. I want to be. I want to speak on the same stages as Tony Robbins and people like that. Do I have that ability? I don't know. I got to keep working on my craft, and some of that I do feel the ghost of Jason Redman is limiting me from getting there.
Wow. So, and that's interesting because Is that because you feel like you're doing it from a point, like having to prove yourself, and it's coming from more like a negative kind of connotation as to a positive one?
Yes, I believe that. And it's interesting. I've only come to figure this out in the last couple of months.
I mean, I've had this conversation and this realization recently, actually, of a similar thing. I told you about the story with the church pastor. That was a lot about letting go, and you can still work towards something without having a firm, tight grip on it at all times. And it's that tight grip that's almost choking the life out of what you're trying to achieve. But it feels so contradictory that working as hard as you possibly can, grinding as hard as you possibly can, isn't the answer to get to that top tier. I mean, what's your pathway that you think is to get you to that next level?
I think it's to become truly content with who I am, and this is me, and not to be afraid. I mean, that's part of the problem. I don't know if any of you have ever watched Sean Whalen. He's an interesting guy out in social media, but Sean just speaks his mind, probably way too much. I mean, sometimes I don't agree with everything Sean says, but I've met him, and I love the business he's built. He runs a company called Lions Not Sheep, and it's about just taking power. And I will say that we live in this world where we are afraid to say things or do things, or, maybe if I go down this road, maybe somebody will disagree and things like that. And man, everything we do in this life shapes us into who we are. So I was in the military, and then I became a military officer. Well, I had to be careful of what I said, I then ran a nonprofit. I had to be careful of what I said there, which I think has shaped me into someone who oftentimes isn't fully authentic to who I am. Couple that with, the ghost of Jason Redman and this fear of disappointing people or disappointing, I don't know. So I don't know what the answer is. I'd love to tell you that. I do think it's learning to be content with your true authentic self. And I think that then enables you to reach the highest level you have the ability to be. And for me, and being content with that, man, that's what I want. I want to be content. If I want to be able to look at my life and say, man, one, I made a positive impact on people around me. Two, I achieved the highest level I have the ability to be. But right now, I don't think I'm there. I think I'm dragging this weight around, and I'm giving people about, I don't know, 70% of who I am, but 30% I'm like, I don't know. What if they disagree? What if they don't like? What if they, they don't want to hear from you. You're this skinny little runt, Oh, Navy SEAL. You're not a Navy SEAL. You're a, runt. Nobody wants to listen to you. They want to listen to David Goggins. Those are the voices I hear. And so that's my challenge, where I am at my life right now. And once again, I am so grateful. I have an amazing life. I have an amazing family. I've built an amazing business, or maybe I should say we're building an amazing business. We're getting there. But I'm still on the growth trajectory, and I've come to realize that it has nothing to do with any external things that I want to point fingers at. It's not that, well, they're not picking you because of whatever conspiracy theories I have in my mind. It has everything to do with I think once I become totally content in who I am and the message I deliver, which I believe in that message, but I think there's an additional component of it that I haven't quite unlocked or come to grips with. So,
the speaking thing of, if I say something that they might not agree, that's something that completely ruins how I try and speak. Like if I try and do a video and I'm directing to the audience, a lot of the time I will caveat everything with, you might not like that, and it just, it completely comes across as inauthentic, because if I don't agree with it, or I am a certain way, I should just say that. Like it shouldn't be. I completely ruin myself when I do that. When you was 17, 18 that you got into sort of the training of the military, what was that experience like? Your first time? Did you know what you was, coming to expect because of the family that you'd been around and stuff?
Yeah, and I did a lot of, thankfully, as I got closer, I found books. I read things. I was very fortunate. The first training school I went to in the Navy was here in the Virginia Beach area. The SEAL teams are based here in Virginia Beach. And the training school had connections to some of the SEALs. So some of the SEALs would come over and train us who were getting ready or wanted to go to SEAL training. And it was through the winter here in Virginia Beach. And they hammered us, which was good. And I loved it. I will admit, never once did I feel like, don't get me wrong, I didn't like the, cold, things like that. But I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed training. I knew it was going to be hard, and I knew it was preparing me for that. I then, when I left that training school, there was a delay in going to SEAL training, so I got assigned to the East Coast SEAL headquarters. So I got an additional exposure to the SEAL teams at 18 years old and getting exposed to this community. There were several of us that were there who were waiting to go to SEAL training. So they had training that we did, once again, reinforcing, it's the negative things in life. That's probably reinforced some of the ridiculous demons I carry. But I had a warrant officer, great dude, and he probably didn't intend anything like this, but he was like, "You're a skinny little runt." He's like, "You're never going to make it through training." He's like, "I want you to go down, and every day I want you to sit in the bay for 10 minutes. It's like the middle of winter, so the water temp's like, 38, 40 degrees. And I would do it every single day. I'd go sit in there. But funny, I think it probably created more of that perception, which just drove me even more to say, "I'll prove you wrong." But all of that, I will say, mentally prepared me. Like, it was no shock to me. I think for a lot of guys that go out to training, for whatever reason, they're not prepared for the level of shock that training does to you. It is designed to be mentally, physically, and emotionally overwhelming. It's purposely designed to be that way. It's purposely designed to be unfair. And a lot of guys just cannot wrap their head around that. And they're really good. They tee it up slowly before day one of training starts. So in the in-doc phase for like a month, you're kind of learning what training is, and they kind of act like it's hard, and it is hard. But not like when day one hits, it's like they hit you with a sledgehammer. And man, there's a mass exodus of people that quit within the first couple of days, just right out the gates. And I think those are the people that haven't been able to wrap their heads around, like, this is going to be really hard. And so for me, that was no shock. I was like, okay, this is what we expected, so let's go. So I think that was good. I don't think there was ever... I don't feel like there was ever a time that I was like, "Oh my God, this is so much exponentially hard than I ever thought it was going to be." I knew it was going to be brutally cold, and it was going to be very hard. And I knew as long as I didn't quit, for the most part, I'd make it.
Could you paint a picture for somebody who doesn't know anything about what that training looks like the tougher days?
So, the toughest part of SEAL training is Hell Week. Hell Week is considered by many to be the hardest block of training in the U.S. military. We definitely have the highest attrition rate of any block of training, specifically in that week. On average, you'll lose almost 80% of the class will quit during Hell Week. And it is the pruning, if you will. It is the last, I don't want to say the last, but it is probably the biggest training device used in SEAL training to weed out the people who don't have the mental fortitude to endure massive discomfort and pain to want to be there, because they apply it in a myriad of really hard ways. Number one, physically demanding activity for Hell Week lasts a week, almost a week. It's about 5.5 days, so a work week, if you will. During that week, you get almost no sleep. You'll average about 3 hours of sleep. So probably 72 hours in, you're starting to hallucinate. I remember multiple times I was hallucinating during Hell Week. You're 90% of the time you are wet, cold, and coated in sand. So what's happening is you're chafing holes. A lot of guys chafe holes on the inside of their legs and their groin area and your armpits, on your neck, on top of your head. Not uncommon for guys, toenails and fingernails to fall off or pop off from just being wet. And I don't know what causes that, if maybe a combination of being wet and you're not like sleeping, so your body's not re-regulating. But those are all common things that happen. You're shivering all the time. So what starts to happen, your muscles are locking up from shivering. So now you're like locking up in pain from shivering. Hell Week's so bad that a lot of people will be like, oh my God, this is gross. I'm not the first person to tell this. Like, you'll let someone pee on you to try and be warm for only a few minutes. Like, you'll be huddled with a guy and he's like, I gotta pee. And you're like, dude, just do it, because that's how you literally become primal. It almost becomes like, I just have to survive this. But you also have to think. You still have to exist as a team. You have to get through the evolutions, because it's not like mindless activity. Everything is, you're accomplishing different things, from problem solving to navigating the obstacle course to doing a time run to doing swim, whatever it is. You're doing all these different things, but now you're doing it with the highest levels of stress, pressure, pain, and lack of sleep.
Is the week just cranking up the intensity as it goes along, or?
What's interesting is the week cranks up in the beginning, and then it actually starts to come down. When somebody had told me, and almost probably led me to almost quit, because, in this life, unrealistic expectations, by getting into Wednesday and Thursday, if you were to watch training and you watch those last couple of days and you would watch the first couple of days, you would say, they're not going as hard now. Well, some of that is just, it's impossible. You're literally guiding zombies, if you will, so there's a level of safety with the students that the instructors are making sure, hey, we're not pushing you so hard when you're in this mentally broken down state where, you could sustain injury. So technically, but in your mind, when you're in it, you feel like, it's funny, you think you're like chariots of fire running, like da, 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 da. You're thinking like, I am so fast on Thursday. And literally you're like a broken turtle.
So you finished the training, and what was that moment like, passing?
All of SEAL training, or when I finished Hell Week?
When you finished, Hell Week specifically would be,
Hell Week was amazing. To know that I had finished it. Hell Week is the biggest crucible of SEAL training. There's still some other ones, and Hell Week is what bonds every SEAL. And there are frequent times that many of us have talked about that it was your ability to get through Hell Week that later would enable you to grind through the hardest moments in combat. And I would, my moment in combat became a mental, it was a focus on staying awake to stay alive. Like, I knew that if I let go and closed my eyes and went to sleep, I'd never wake up again. So in some ways that came back to those lessons. And I've talked to other guys that have been shot and in crazy situations where a will to survive and persevere is a really powerful thing. I think any paramedic or doctor can tell you, when someone decides, we may not be able to stay alive indefinitely, but I guarantee you can stay alive if I take one person and give them exact same injuries and one decides he's ready to die, he will die very quickly. Whereas the other one, if they're fighting and fighting and fighting, they will live for a substantially long period of time, because it's amazing the power of the will to live and the will to overcome. And I think that's something that Hell Week and SEAL training teaches you.
I definitely want to go back to the Will to Survive, but what was the moment that you achieved your goal of becoming a SEAL like?
So fast forward, training, Hell Week is in the very beginning of training. I do want to, it's kind of a funny story just to finish Hell Week. You're so cold during Hell Week and you've been shivering for so long. I remember we were finally secured. We got sent to our rooms, and we had these metal frame, but they had these plastic seats, and I dragged it into the shower, and it was a open bay shower that had 12 shower heads. It was probably 12 feet long and 8 feet across. And I took all the jets and pointed them right at this chair. And I laid in that chair under this hot water and slept for hours. So I'm sure any new students who were there and came in the shower, bro, there's this skinny, shriveled up, naked dude asleep in the shower. So that was I remember pizza, Gatorade, and laying in that shower and just oh my God, trying to warm my frozen soul up. Fast forward to the end of training. I mean, training from Hell Week, you still have 4 months of training before you graduate. Hell Week's actually in the beginning. When you graduate, and then the other thing with that is when you graduate, that doesn't mean you're a SEAL. That just means you've made it through the first phase. I try often in my book, The Trident, I write about that basic underwater demolition SEAL training is kind of like high school. And then you have to go to college. And then they assign you to a platoon. And almost, if you look at it from a medical thing, you got to do residency before you're actually officially a doctor or a practicing doctor. That pipeline is kind of similar to us. So you get assigned to a team after you've gone through some advanced training or college, and then you have to prove yourself, kind of like a residency phase, if you will. So I didn't get my Trident until probably another, year and a half after training. But yeah, pretty amazing moment. Back in the day, it was a huge rite of passage. The entire team would line up. The commanding officer would have all the new guys who were getting their Tridents. And back then, we used to wear camouflage uniforms, and we had black Tridents that the older, the other guys wore in their uniforms. But on your dress uniform, it was a gold Trident. And they would present you with that, but then they would tack in your black Trident and they would punch it into your chest. And man, it was an amazing rite of passage. I mean, yes, there's a picture in my book where my chest is all bruised from having 200 teammates, punch my Trident in. But it's such an amazing rite of passage. And you just feel amazing. Like I'm a part of this community, this warrior community, and I've done all these things to reach this level. Yeah, pretty amazing. They don't do that anymore. Not allowed, that would be hazing is the way they look at it now.
So, I mean, in a situation where, you guys are putting your body through hell anyway, they're not allowed to have those moments anymore.
No, there are random moments in the military where things got out of hand. That's the problem. And we live in this knee-jerk society where we throw the baby out with the bathwater, where maybe a pinning ceremony, whether, I don't know of this occurring in the SEAL teams, but I know in other units where, they were so aggressive with punching and, that, it like punctured a lung or it did some long-term damage. So it became, hey, this will never happen again. It's unfortunate. I think there is culture and traditions that make us into who we are. That's a part of the fabric of a warrior culture, a national culture. And because one person says this isn't fair, we don't like this, or we happen to have a couple of one-off instances, then we say we can no longer do this. So it's unfortunate. I do think that was, for me, it was an amazing rite of passage, and to culminate that experience.
Did you feel satisfied, or did you set, we spoke about setting the bar higher, like how long before you just went, I need another?
For a while, I was super satisfied, and I just focused on trying to be a SEAL, and I also think I had somewhat of a good balance. We weren't going to war back then, so we trained hard and we played really hard, and it was just kind of part of the SEAL culture. Sometimes I look back on that and I'm like, yeah, I probably played a little too hard. But it was an amazing time as a young man to grow and hang out in this community. I still had insecurities, but I squashed them most of the time by trying to be as good as I could be. But I always, I think, was pushing myself. I always had this drive I want to be, the best, and, where I have the ability to be the best. So, and I did. I excelled. I did pretty well as a young enlisted SEAL, enough so that I did several deployments to Central and South America, doing counter-drug stuff and working with other, nationalities throughout Colombia and Peru and some of the countries that were down there. I learned Spanish. I was fluent in Spanish back then, so I was one of our primary instructors. I got really good with communications equipment. I was smart in how I can make it work, which is a critical part and job within the SEAL teams. So all of that led to me becoming a training instructor, through being and I did well at that, through being a training instructor, which I'll take a step back. I think that also for the first time taught me, hey, I enjoy teaching other people what I've learned. So that probably was the first time that I learned standing in front of people and sharing what you've learned has power. But did well enough with that I got recommended for a commission. And at this point, it's 1999. We were still in peacetime. There wasn't a whole lot happening in the world, and I was starting, I think, probably, I need to level up. And I had two different options. I had an option of going to our higher tier SEAL team, and I had an option to go the officer route. And I'd been recommended to do that. So I decided I was going to take that path. I had met my wife recently. We were dating. I felt like, hey, someday the military is going to end. This is probably a smarter path. The retirement pays better. It'd probably be easier to get a job afterwards. So it was kind of more of a pragmatic approach that led me down that path.
I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Today's episode was, as always, powered by the amazing HUEL. And if you're anything like me, you might be struggling to get all your nutrients in and all the things that your body needs in. And that's why HUEL Black Edition is the absolute ultimate solution. There's a lot of other products out there on the market aiming to fix that solution, but they have suboptimal ingredients. They take a lot of time and cooking and effort and money, but it can be that easy. That's where HUEL Black Edition comes in for me. It has 40 grams of plant-based protein and 26 vitamins and minerals from amazing sources, and it tastes absolutely amazing. All of those ingredients in HUEL have been carefully selected by experts on the HUEL team to make sure that it meets all the requirements that your body needs. The way I look at it is, it's like a life insurance policy. It's like peace of mind knowing that you've hit all those requirements for your body. And the best thing about it all is it's really easy to prepare. You take one scoop, you shake it, it's quick, and it tastes absolutely great. And if you're super lazy, you can even now get the HUEL Black Edition ready to drink that I drink so often. But don't just take my word for it. Some amazing people around the world like Idris Elba and Russ Cooks, who just ran the whole length of Africa, glugging on HUEL the whole way. They absolutely love it too. So it's not just me who loves it. Those guys love it too. Take their word for it. So if you're looking to push your limits like somebody like Russ Cook, or you're just trying to lead a healthier life and take control of your diet and the nutrients that you put in it, HUEL is an absolute great solution to that. And if you want to get a discount, you can use the code in the pinned top comment for £10 off or $15 off your first order for the next 72 hours. And if it's your first order, outside of those 72 hours, you can also get a free shaker, you can get 10% off reoccurring orders, and you can get a free t-shirt with the link down below. Go check out more details. Thank you for watching, and thank you to HUEL for sponsoring the video. Let's dive back into the podcast episode. So then I'm guessing it's everything changed after 9/11. That was the sort of the moment.
Yeah. So, kind of interesting. So I selected for that commissioning program and got picked up for it probably in the summer of 2000 and was slotted to start school in the summer of 2001. So I married my wife in July of 2001. I checked out of the SEAL team. I checked into Old Dominion University to the ROTC unit there, and was ready to start classes. August, I think I started classes, and obviously we all know what happened on 9/11, and I wanted immediately. I told you. Bobby Ramirez was my best friend, who I told you the gym is named after. So Bobby and I were standing together. We had both gotten selected to go to school together out of our team. And we had linked up in between classes when everything started happening. And we were standing in the student center, and he and I watched the tower, both towers fall, and just said, yeah, we're at war. It's like an intentional thing. So we both tried. We wanted to get out of the program. Like, hey, like, put us back in a platoon. We know we're going to war. And we had a really wise commanding officer, probably one of the most respected leaders in the teams at the time. And he just said, hey, go back to school. He said, this war is going to last for decades. And I mean, what a prophetic thing to say days after 9/11. If 20 years of warfare we fought, and it probably could have kept going if, I don't know. So anyways, an interesting path. So continued down the path at school, did really well, very driven. Like, I think hey, got to be number one, got to grind, got to crush it, got to. I ended up graduating summa cum laude. I ended up being ranked number one, came back to the SEAL teams, and kind of lost myself then. I guess I developed a false sense of how good I was, and came back to the SEAL teams with probably an ego, and made mistakes. I made mistakes. A lot of things had changed from prior to 9/11. I had grown up in a peacetime military. So a lot of the tactics and stuff we used were based on prior conflicts. And this often happens in militaries around the world. Suddenly they get into a large scale warfare. In this case, multiple fronts at this point. So by 2004, when I commissioned and came back to the SEAL teams, we now were fighting in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Something similar, some of the urban warfare, close quarters combat similar, some things very different. Desert warfare, mountain warfare, mobility operations, things like that. So it really caused this major rewrite of SEAL tactics. So when I came back, here I thought I had all this experience and everything had changed. And this is where ego got in my way. I also think, it's funny. I've always said ego. I think, now as I'm getting older and reflecting more, maybe it was insecurity. I actually think that makes a lot more sense. I was unwilling to reach out to the younger guys and say, hey man, I don't know how to do this, because I felt like it was weakness. And I started messing up. I also had a pretty big personality conflict with our senior enlisted guy. So he and I butted heads. I wasn't making very good decisions. I was struggling with some of the tactics. So then I started drinking too much. So that further eroded my credibility as a leader. Kind of continued to ride this train all the way until we deployed to Afghanistan in the summer of 2004. And that was the Operation Red Wings deployment. So the Marcus Luttrell story was Operation Red Wings. And I was in Germany. We were getting ready to rotate in Afghanistan to relieve those guys. And we got word, like literally we're packing all our stuff. It was only going to be another week or so before we rotated in Afghanistan. Excuse me. They would come to Germany, and basically they called it a rotate in place, a RIP. And we got word that our helicopter had been shot down. And I was originally in Echo Platoon who had been on that helicopter, and I got moved into Foxtrot. So I had friends. Mike McGreevy, the OIC, had been my original OIC, and I had known Mike from years past. I mean, just a great guy. My youngest daughter and his daughter were only born months apart, so he and I frequently would talk about daughters. So I remember, the thought of losing Mike, Jacques Fontaine, Jeff Lucas, Jeff Taylor, Mike, and our task unit commander, Eric Christensen, were all the guys who were part of my troop. And then obviously we lost the individuals from SDV Team 1 and 2. And then we found out that we had lost the guys on the ground, and that Marcus was evading, And then finally they found Marcus. Myself and some other guys went up to Landstuhl, Germany, where he had been recovered, and they flew in. When they flew him in, they flew in Mike Murphy and Danny Dietz's bodies. They had been recovered. And so I remember being there. We stood watch for a little bit on their bodies while those guys, because we always have somebody that escorts the bodies home. So the guys that were escorting them home went and took a break, got some lunch. We stood watch. They came back. I met Marcus for the first time. And then probably a day or two later, we flew into Afghanistan. So, I don't know, kind of had struggled as a young leader. So I wanted to prove myself. Once again, a very dangerous thing, which is even more important why I think it's critical in life that you become content with, not necessarily content. You still want to rise up. We still want to be there. But I think it's dangerous when I think it makes people do erratic and potentially things for the wrong reasons. And I almost feel like I've lived my life that way, And I felt like that drove me like, hey, I want to get in the fight. I want to be in the mix. And as a combat leader, that's also a very dangerous thing, because you're leading people into a situation where if it's not for the right reasons and you're not making the right decisions, people die. So that means decisions you're making ultimately send people to their death. And it's one thing when you're going after a mission and you're doing things according to plan. Unfortunately, that's part of the job. It's another thing if you have a leader who's making bad decisions, who places you in a terrible situation. And that's kind of what happened months later. In September, I made a bad call. We were on a mission, and without getting too deep into the details, all the details are in my book, The Trident. I go deep into the details on this, but I basically took myself off a position of tactical advantage, brought a machine gunner, and went down into the valley to try and enforce guys down below who were in a gunfight. A lot of people who don't understand tactics would say, well, what's wrong with that? That sounds heroic. It was driven by my own desire to be in the fight. It also went against, I had been told by my senior enlisted, who we butted heads, hey, don't go down in that valley. I let my ego get in the way, and instead of asking why, I just said, screw you, I'm going. If I had stopped, I would have found out, hey, they're getting ready to call in an airstrike. Like, we need to know where everyone is. So when I made that decision to go down into that valley, it delayed that airstrike by 30 minutes. I am super fortunate that no one was killed or injured during that time. But I will tell you, it killed my professional reputation. By the time I got to the other side of the valley and out of the valley and linked back up with the guys, they were like, get rid of that dude. He's dangerous. Flew me back to Bagram to meet with the commanding officer and was, told, hey, we're thinking about kicking you out. There were a lot of guys who wanted to see me kicked out. And I think that was, I don't want to say rock bottom. I don't think I had hit that yet, but it was rock bottom enough that I thought about killing myself. The night prior to finding out their decision, whether they were kick me out or not, I pulled my gun out and put it in my mouth and thought about, ending my life. Thankfully, I did not. I saw a picture of my wife and kids and just thought, what are you doing? Went and got help, saw the chaplain, came back, he convinced me to wait and find out. And thankfully they did not kick me out. My commanding officer was really against the will of many of the guys. Many of the guys and some of the senior leaders said, get rid of that guy. He's dangerous. He's going to get somebody killed. And he said, well, I think he has potential. I think we need to humble him and I'm going to give him a second chance. And he did. So out of that second chance, there were several things that happened. They took away any awards I was supposed to get. They wrote a letter of reprimand that didn't go into my officer record, because if it had, it would have been the end of my career. That's kind of how the military works. But instead, he said, I'm going to put it in my safe. If you do well the next go around, it gets shredded and gone. Your career keeps going. And he said, I'm going to send you to U.S. Army Ranger School. And which is funny, because when I was younger, I wanted to go to Ranger School just to go to Ranger School. It's just, I don't know, I wanted to check that box and be like, hey, if I'm a SEAL, I want to have a Ranger tab too. And that was not real uncommon in the SEAL teams back then. After the war kicked off, it was more uncommon because Ranger School is a hard school. It's hard on the body. Most guys lose 20, 30 pounds when they're going through Ranger School, because one of the things they use is a lack of food to create stress and adversity on you. So yeah, now here I am 13 years in, had done pretty well, although I'd made all these mistakes as a leader, as a new leader, and now I'm being told to go to Ranger School. So yeah, I really kind of had a victim mindset about it. I was pretty angry and pissed off. Instead of being like, wow, I got a second chance. What can I do with this? I wasn't there yet. So a couple months later, went to Ranger School, kind of hit rock bottom there. I failed the land nav course on my own accord because arrogantly thought I could knock out the entire course in the daytime. You were supposed to start at 3 a.m., 6 a.m. the sun came up. You had about 3 hours to complete this very long, arduous 6-point land navigation course. Well, I decided, well, hey, I'm good enough. I'm good enough. I'll cover the whole thing in 3 hours when the sun comes up. So I kicked around and screwed off and pissed and moaned about being there. And yeah, I didn't finish. So when that occurred, and I went to check in, the Ranger instructors, there's a good rivalry, for the most part, a healthy rivalry between SEALs and Rangers and other branches. And they started talking shit, hey, you suck, hey, Swabby, maybe if we had given you a boat, you would have finished, and stupid things like that. And I let my anger and everything that had happened just bubble up and basically told them, screw you in this course. And they said, are you quitting? And I said, yes. And they said, okay, well, here, get in this van, you're done. And man, when the words came out of my mouth, I was like, what are you doing? You're an idiot. Like I wanted to take them back, but at that point I felt like, well, too late now. And I just kind of resigned myself like, well, this is the end of your career. Like you've played your hand and, you'll never be able to recover from this. And I also had started to lie to myself in my head. And this is, the conspiracy theories in your mind. I bought into this idea that the guys would never follow me again. Like, hey, you've messed up too much. No one will ever follow you again. So that was kind of my thought, like, how am I ever going to be able to go back after the mistakes that I made? And now, oh my God, you just quit Ranger School. SEALs don't quit anything. If we'll kick you out if you quit. So I was like, I don't know how I can recover from this. I guess this is it. And I remember calling my wife and saying, hey, I guess I'm coming home tomorrow. I think this is done. I said, I think I'm going to get kicked out of the military. So she listened and was super understanding, went and saw the Ranger Colonel. And he was like, hey, do you want to talk to anybody in the SEAL team? I was like, not only no, but no. Like, I am ashamed, man. I don't want to talk to anybody. And he was like, well, hey, one of my friends is senior leader. Well, it was my old commanding officer, the one who I'd gone and seen, who said, hey, this war is going to last for decades. One of the most respected guys I know. There's no way I could not talk to him. And he had him on the phone. And I remember talking, and he just said, hey, Red, what are you doing? And I laid out this sob story, and he said, listen to me. He said, the guys will follow you if you give them a reason to. He's like, that's all leadership is. He said, I don't care how bad you've messed up. You know, sustained superior performance over time is what people will follow. I don't care who you are. I don't care what team you're on. Humans will follow success. He's like, go crush that course, come back to the SEAL teams and give the guys a reason to follow you. And that's what I really needed to hear. Like, oh, there is actually a formula for me to drive forward. And that became a formula that I started to build all my leadership around. Lead yourself, lead others, lead always. I'm not perfect in it, but it was a formula I put in place that I used through Ranger School. I used it as I got back to the SEAL teams. And I just tried to, I stopped trying to take some shortcut to be a great leader and just focus on how to be the best leader of myself, which I was really good at, despite the doubts and the demons that live inside your head that I heard on a regular basis. And that was really hard for me, because as a kid that had always grown up thinking of himself as a skinny runt, now I stepped into the phase of, you're a fuck up. We don't want you. You're a fuck up. And that was really hard to come back. And, guys pulled no punches. I mean, my nickname was Rambo Red. Not a compliment. So, but it taught me a lot of resilience. And it also taught me to ignore those voices. I just got really good at, that demon in your mind that's telling you you're not good enough, that you're a fuck up, that you're a failure. Ignore it. So I just always had this static in the back of my mind, like this ongoing music back there that I just ignored. And I just kept driving forward and just focus on, hey, lead yourself when it's time to lead others, and make the right decision all the time. Lead always. So all of that slowly but surely earned back, my credibility and trust with the guys. Ended up deploying to Iraq, and our troop deployed in April of 2007. And a very, very eventful deployment. Definitely the most action-packed deployment I was ever on. A lot of guys tell me it was one of the most action-packed they were ever on. I mean, our troop over that deployment conducted 80 missions. So 80 missions to capture or kill high-level Al-Qaeda or insurgent leaders. And as SEALs, it was like everything you ever dreamed of. So it was a lot of opportunity for me to lead and learn and really to try and put these things into place. And definitely, one night in June, we got into a very big, complicated firefight, multiple enemy positions. I had an enemy machine gunner and shooters up on a rooftop, barricaded in. I don't know if DJ told the story. He was shot in the chest. He was one of our guys on that target. And when he moved up and one of our other point men to try and take that rooftop, one of the guys shot him right in the chest. But thankfully his body armor, it struck a magazine and his body armor, fell back, kind of created massive chaos. We had a grenade drop down and frag a couple of our guys, and severely injured our interpreter. So chaos, screaming, blood, had women and children all in this target that we tried to pull inside, taking fire from the rooftop, which is shooting on other targets, and fire from another building around. Managed that pretty well, and we managed to pull everybody back along with the women and children to another target and then drop that building. And after that target that night, a lot of guys came up to me and said, "Hey man, you did a great job." It was kind of nice. It was like this full circle moment, like, hey, you proved you're not the fuck up. You have the ability to do this job, which was good. I think that was tremendous for my confidence. And I felt like, hey man, I finally got here. Like I'm back on track. I got my career back on track. I requested if I could screen for our next tier SEAL team, and I was given a thumbs up to do that, which is a big deal. Given the past mistakes I had made, didn't mean I was going to go there. It just meant that I was going through the screening. So, there's both physical and kind of a mental and evaluation that you go through to be able to go to that next level. But I at least had been given the thumbs up to try that. So I was training hard for that in between missions, training hard to kind of finish and, wrap up our deployment. And, and if that next year didn't work, then what were going to be the next jobs that I was going to do. So we were looking at all that. So probably 1 week before we were going home, we got tasked to go after a high-level Al-Qaeda leader. Guy, he was the #1 leader for the Anbar province of Iraq. Launched on that mission. Took down the initial target. Nobody was there. We thought it was going to be a quiet night. Basically, we found all kinds of weapons and IED making components, and we were going to blow that in place. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning at this point, and we thought, okay, that'll be it. We blow this, we blow up the IED and explosives, and then we're out of here, extract, and that'll be it for tonight. And while we were waiting on that, we saw a bunch of activity on another house about 150 yards away. Saw some individuals run out of that house, run into some vegetation across the street. And my boss came up to me and said, "Hey, we just saw this. We had seen it before. We had seen individuals run and hide in vegetation and things like that. They not realizing, we have snipers with eyes and things like this who are watching." And he said, let's wrap these guys up. Typically good people don't run out of buildings in the middle of the night and hide unless they have a reason to. So we had wrapped up actually, terrorist leaders before several times on our earlier part of the deployment in scenarios like this. So yeah, I took my team. We navigated through this vegetation, coming up from the south to the north where these guys were hiding. And we did not know it, but they were the last part of a ambush line that they had put into that vegetation. So they had fighting positions built in there. They had multiple machine guns and AK-47s. And we came up behind them. But what ended up happening is we got separated in the vegetation. That's a really dangerous situation to be. We call it a blue on blue, where friendly forces are both shooting at each other with the enemy in the middle. So we made the call like, hey, push out of the vegetation. We'll push out of the vegetation on this side, and then we'll get to the north and we'll link back up. We were not aware. We were asking. At this point, we had a AC-130 gunship. It's kind of an aircraft that has weapons and high-level targeting equipment to be able to see things happening on the ground even at night. And I was talking to them and I said, "Hey, can you see anything? Are you seeing any movement?" "No, we're not seeing anything." "Are you seeing any weapons?" "No, we're not seeing any weapons." So we just said, okay, we're going to push up to the north. We're going to link back up, and then we'll go into the vegetation and wrap these guys up. Well, yeah, we walked right into their ambush. So when we went up to the north, we walked right into what we call the kill zone. So all the weapons are pointed this way, and literally they opened up on us. So my medic was initially hit, took a round right below the knee, severed both bones, which dropped him into the ground. One of our other guys ran forward and started to drag him back, and he was shot 3 times up the body. Still a strong and big enough guy to drag himself and the medic back to, it was like a tractor tire behind us. DJ was with us. He bounded back, and the only points of cover, meaning something that'll stop bullets, were the tractor tire, which is kind of like this large John Deere style, and like one tree. And DJ fell back behind the tree. The rest of the guys fell behind the tire, and I was still out front at this point. I was laying down fire when I initially got shot. So I got shot across the body armor and took the round in the arm. Well, I took 2 rounds in the arm, but I didn't know it at the time. I thought my arm got shot off in the moment. I'd never been shot before, and it was with a PKM machine gun. So it's a big belt-fed weapon that shoots pretty big bullets, 7.62 by 54. And when it hit me in the arm, I lost all feeling, and it actually felt like, I mean, and I've often described it like if you bang your funny bone, it's kind of like that, only by like amplify that by 1,000. It literally felt like a lightning bolt struck me in the arm and traveled up my arm and like spiked me in the back of the head, and then I had no feeling. So I think my arm kind of caught on my gear. Because now it's nighttime. It's like 3:30 in the morning. So when I reached over, I didn't feel my arm. And my initial thought was, holy shit, I just got my arm shot off. I tried to shoot again. I think I dropped down. And then I was taking a lot of fire. At this point, I took a round off my gun. I had my left night vision tube shot off. I was taking really a lot of fire. So I decided I was going to try and move back to the tire. So the guys said they saw me stand up and turn and run to them when the round hit me from behind. It caught me right in front of the ear and traveled through. So they saw me fall in front of them and thought I was dead. We don't know how long. 5, 10 minutes, I was unconscious. The total gunfight lasted probably 40 minutes. But they were engaging the enemy. I'm unconscious, and literally this firefight is happening directly above me. When I finally came to, I basically woke up, and what I remember was I was laying on my back, and I was seeing laser beams travel over me, which at first I couldn't quite put my thoughts together. It was super cloudy. I mean, if you've ever been knocked out, it kind of takes a little bit to get your brain working and figure out where you are and things to come back to place. So I was, man, what happened? What's wrong? Like, where am I? Hearing the gunfire, seeing the laser beams. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, holy shit, you're in this gunfight, and that's tracer fire. So every 5th round of a machine gun has phosphorus in the gunpowder. So it looks like a laser beam through the air. That's how machine gunners sight their weapon. That's what, people often see in movies and things like that. So I remember, like, that was my first thought, like, holy shit, like, literally that's right above me. Like, if you sit up, you're dead. And I'm like, man. So, I quickly realized, like, man, I am out of the fight. I tried to get my tourniquet on. We had been trained. I knew I'd been shot in the arm. I remembered that. I think at some point I remember reaching up to my face and realizing, holy shit, like there's a giant hole in my face. Like I've been shot in the face. And I was like, I got to get a tourniquet on. Like, because I still thought my arm had been shot off. Interesting. I used to carry my tourniquet either on the top, or I think I carried it on the bottom of my body armor. And I use these really thick rubber bands, which for a healthy, strong individual, no big deal. But when I tried to break them, I'd already lost so much blood. I was so weak, I couldn't get my tourniquet. I was like, holy shit, I'm going to bleed out because I can't even get my own tourniquet on. So there was a lull in fire, and I remember calling out, or I might have even gone on the radio, I'm not sure. But I called out to my team leader, and he said, Red, you're still alive? I was like, yes. How long to the medevac? Because I knew I couldn't last that long. So I was like, and the reality is I should have realized, hey, man, we got to win the gunfight before we can bring in the medevac. But I trusted them to do that. And he said 5 minutes. So I think that was probably 15, 20 minutes, period of time. I think when they realized that, they requested a fire mission. The gunship said, "We're so close. We'll kill you guys. You guys are way too close. You are in extreme danger close situation, meaning if we bring in the rounds, they're going to kill you the same time we kill the enemy because of the fragmentation and blast radius." So they wanted us to move back somehow. And my team leader was like, "There's no way. There's no place for us to go. Red's pinned down out front, 10 yards. We can't run into this gunfire." So we asked again, probably 5 minutes later. They said no. The third time, probably 5 minutes later, he said, "Look, no one's going to be left." He's like, "We're going to be out of ammo, and these guys are going to bleed out and die before we can get out of here." So he's like, "You have to bring in this fire mission." So at that point, they basically said, "The responsibility's on you. You are accepting responsibility for the fact that we may kill you." And he had to give his, we call it a Joint Tactical Air Controller Specific Designator, JTAC, which basically means he is trained and qualified to call in rounds from an aircraft. But by them making him give his JTAC designator, if we had been killed, it basically relieved the aircraft from the responsibility. They had said, "Hey, we are going to kill you. Like, you have to accept this." So he called out to me and said, "Hey, incoming." And I remember laying there, and the machine gun was still, and hearing the rounds go off from the gun. The aircraft flies at a pretty high altitude. You can't see it in the dark, but you can hear the gun go off. 40 millimeter fires a round that's about this big and about this long, and it's explosive. Has about a 60-meter blast radius. And I remember hearing it go off, boom, 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 boom. And like waiting, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. And then all of a sudden, boom, 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 in front of us. And all this dirt and shit blew up over me. And the gun went cold. And I remember hearing the guy on the gun crying out in pain. Allah, Allah Akbar. He was, calling out to his God. I remember thinking, stand by. And next rounds came in. Boom, 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 boom. At that point, my team leader ran forward and got me and dragged me back to the tire and got a tourniquet on my arm. So saved my life. The guys were also back there. They packed my face. We ended up calling in several more fire missions to take out the rest of the enemy. And then finally we called in the medevac. But that fire mission was the closest fire mission ever executed in the entire Iraq war. Like literally calling rounds directly on our position. I wouldn't be here. It's nothing heroic, nothing amazing. I'm not this incredible warrior. I mean, the only thing that happened for me that night is I stayed awake, stay alive. That was it. That was my primary focus. And I trusted my teammates to be able to win that fight. And they did. And I owe my life to my teammates. I owe my life to that gunship that was up overhead. And then shortly later, I would owe my life to all the incredible medical doctors and nurses who, saved my life in that operating room, an hour later.
You said earlier in the interview, a will to survive, like it was proven, like when you'd worked with medics in the past, people had a will to survive versus people who would just accept the death was, a much, much higher chance of survival. At that moment, were you conscious when you were, like, was there any consciousness, or did you just wake up in hospital bed?
No. What's interesting, I was convinced I never lost consciousness. I would later find out that was not true. I didn't see the guys again. Well, I saw the guys were with me in the ICU in Balad, and then they flew me from Balad to Germany. But I didn't see the guys again for probably 3 weeks, after they came home from deployment and guys came up. And it was only then that I started to learn that I drifted in and out of consciousness all through that gunfight. I was telling the doctors I never lost consciousness, which is kind of funny. So no, in my mind, I remember I'd written down everything that had happened because I couldn't talk. I can only write. So I had written down everything that had happened in the gunfight. And later the guys came back and filled in holes. They were like, no, this happened. And no, you missed this happened. In the gunfight, when I was laying there, what I remember was, I remember initially thinking about the firefight. Like, man, this is a bad situation. How do we deal with this? And I remember thinking about, like, we would need to call in a fire mission, and we have quick reaction force, and hey, we have these other guys here, and we need to get a medevac in. So I was thinking about what I'd been trained to do, but then I kind of realized, like, bro, you're out of the fight. Like, your job is to survive. That's it. So I also, before I got to that point, I thought that I was going to die. I did think about that. I thought I was going to bleed out and that I would never see my wife and kids again. And that kind of made me sad and angry. I didn't want the enemy to have the satisfaction of knowing they had killed me. I think killing any American for them was a great victory. Killing special operations was a tremendous victory for them. So I didn't want to contribute to that, which is kind of an egotistical thing, I guess, but I remember thinking about that. So interesting, I called out to God. I said, Lord, I need your help to come home. I need your strength. And because I was reaching a point where I had no strength. I felt like every breath felt like I got a 10,000 pound weight on my chest. Like, just to take a breath was incredibly difficult. I remember trying to move my right hand at one point and I couldn't even feel my right hand. I was really cold. It was getting hard to think. So I was like, you're dying. Like, you're going through all the physiological components of dying. So I called out to God and I said, hey, I need your strength. I need to go home. I want to see my wife and kids again. And immediately upon that prayer, I had strength, energy. I can't explain it. I've often given this testimony in church. And what's interesting is however long that period lasted, I just focused on stay awake, stay alive. That's what was in my head. And it is the greatest fatigue I've ever felt. Everything in me wanted to go to sleep, but I knew that if I went to sleep, I'd never wake up again. So that really does, that is the will to live. Obviously people who don't believe in God will say, oh, whatever, that's BS. Your will help you to stay alive, but it wouldn't have saved you indefinitely. I buy that. The human body will only operate for so long without fluid in it. And I was leaking all mine out on the ground. So, there was a limit to what could happen. But I do believe that something happened. I believe a combination of my will, belief, whether there was a supernatural part of that, I don't know. I often struggle with that. Faith is a hard thing. I still struggle with it today. But I do know I went from not being able to move a muscle to suddenly having energy that when, however further the medevac came in, my team leader helped me to my feet and I walked 75 yards and got on that helicopter. So I went from, I can't even take a breath and move my hand, to I walked to the helicopter and got on under my own power. So, crazy night. I was not able to get out of the helicopter under my own power by the time we got to Baghdad. It got me off. I remember them pulling me off the helicopter. Weird, the things that stick out in your mind. I remember, I don't know if I was on the back of a golf cart or whatever I was, but I remember them driving me, and there was like this wood walkway up over the whatever we were driving on. And I remember looking up and, I couldn't see out of this eye, but I remember being able to see out of this eye. And just the image of a guy smoking a cigarette, leaning over, looking down at me as I went under this thing. And you're almost there. Stay awake, stay alive. Got me in. They got me to the outer room. You know, they got to remove all your gear. I remember them cutting all that off, and then they put me into the operating room. And, you know, lots of activity, barking out orders, bright lights, and just thinking to myself, like, you made it. Like, you can die and they'll save you. Like, you've got some of the best trauma surgeons in the world. I remember I had read a statistic that if you make it to the combat support hospital operating room with a pulse, the trauma surgeons there had a 90% chance, or had a 90% success rate of saving guys. So I was like, you know, you can die and they will save you. And I started to let go. And about that moment, I had a grenade apparently on my belt that they had missed. And this nurse found it and goes, he's still got a bomb on him. Cleared the operating room. Everybody runs out. And I remember that was kind of my final thought as I drifted off, which obviously somebody came in and got it. And, you know, they came in and saved me. So that became, you know, the next phase of the story.
So then you get transferred one more time to a different facility in Germany?
Two. So I was in Baghdad. They moved me to Balad, where head injuries are, which is local. I don't remember that movement at all. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming they probably took me by vehicle. When I got to Balad, I don't remember the journey to Germany either. They would have had to flown me by plane, but I don't remember that. So the next thing I remember, I was in Germany. So I remember being in Balad in the ICU. There are parts of that I remember. And then the next thing I remember, I'm in Germany. And then I remember the flight home from Landstuhl to America.
At what point were family notified, like your wife, kids, and what point did you see them?
So I didn't see them. So my wife was notified almost immediately. Although she had left her phone that day, so go figure. And they were blowing up the phone. When we called from overseas, it would patch through a government line. So if I dialed her from overseas, it would show up U.S. government on our home phone. So she came home around noon after picking the kids up from school and looked at the phone. And I mean, we were supposed to be home in 2 weeks. I was supposed to be home in 2 weeks. We were supposed to go on vacation. My sister was getting married. So we were going to the wedding. It's going to be great. And she looked at the phone and was like, oh my God, there's like 20 missed calls from Jay. You know, she assumed it was me. She's like, that's weird. She's like, maybe he's just blowing me up for, you know, coordinating him coming home. So she's home, phone rings again. She picks it up. It's my commanding officer. He said, Erica, it's Gus. And line went dead, dropped, which frequently happens with phones from over there. So now suddenly it dawns on her like something's wrong. Well, why would the commanding officer be calling me? At dawn, she, you know, oh my God, I've missed 30 calls. She tried to stay calm. You know, typically if someone in the military dies, they don't call you, they show up in uniform. But then she was like, what if they showed up this morning and I wasn't here? So she waited, and he calls back again. He's like, Erica, it's Gus. Call drops again. So she's kind of beside herself. Probably another 10 minutes goes by, and finally he calls back. He gets a hold of her. He said, Erica, it's Gus. Hey, your husband's the luckiest guy I know. He pulled no punches. He said he's been shot in the arm. He's been shot in the face. You know, he's coming out of surgery, but he's still alive. So at that point, she didn't really know what you know, obviously to be told someone's been shot in the face, she didn't know what my mental faculties were. She started prepping. You know, people called her and said, hey, he'll be home in 4 days. Bethesda, you can meet him here. So she basically tried to get everything in place, got family to come in to be with the kids, and planned on going up to Bethesda. When I was in Germany, we called her. A teammate flew with me to Germany, And he said, "Hey, do you want to call your wife?" And I said, "Yeah." So obviously I couldn't talk, so I would just write. So, so he called, and I wrote on a piece of paper and handed it to him. And he's like, "Seriously, you want me to say this?" And I was like, "Yes." And it said, "Hey babe, I got all shot up, but my wang's okay." So, so that was kind of the first thing I said to her. Because it was kind of like an ongoing joke within the troop and platoon, like, don't get your dick shot off. But for her, it was like, he's okay. Like, his sense of humor is there. And so, yeah, we only talked for maybe a couple of minutes through that. And then I saw her when I got to the hospital. She was there in the room when I got there to the ICU.
How old were the kids at the time?
2, 4, and my son had just turned 8.
What was the transition like? Like, obviously for them, you've come back in, I'm guessing, like bandages and like wrapped up and stuff. Like, was there a fear that they're not going to recognize you? That there's a difficulty there? Yeah.
Yeah, and we made some decisions. I mean, I did not want the kids to see me in the ICU. I was too weak to get out of bed. I mean, I was, the blood loss, I wasn't even strong enough to go to the bathroom on my own. I had to have nurses help me to use the bathroom. I had 8 blood transfusions over the 96-hour period from the time I was wounded to the time I got to Bethesda. So just, crushed my strength. And I'm by now, 4 days later, like, I have a picture from only a few days after the hospital. My head is swollen out like this, like both eyes were bloodshot. I mean, you couldn't even see, just red. I looked like an alien. All the stitches are protruding out from the swelling. There's nothing left of my nose. I just have these orange tubes where what was left of my nose. I'm trached, I'm wired shut. They're feeding me through a stomach tube. I'm on the ventilator. So I didn't want the kids to see me that way. So I wanted, A, to have some surgeries and for them to fix me a little better. And B, I wanted to walk into the room where the kids were. Like, that was my goal. Like, hey. So it was 3.5 weeks before I finally saw them. But, pretty amazing that in 3.5 weeks I was able to do that.
What was the transition? Was there ever I'm guessing there was a low moment afterwards, but like, was it back up on my feet, I'm going to work straight into this, tough mindset? Or was there a transitionary period where, you had to face difficulties? You mentioned alcohol on one of your first deployments. Did that creep in, like the idea of turning to alcohol?
Later. I don't want to say in the beginning it did. I'll be honest, in the beginning, I think I was just elated to still be alive. And there was just this relentless push to get better. So I'd say for the first year, although don't get me wrong, in the very beginning, it was very difficult to kind of come to grips with, man, I am severely disfigured. In the beginning, they were telling me they were going to amputate my arm. The amount of damage I had no function of my hand. So I had this nerve damage that they didn't know if it was going to get better. My elbow was totally destroyed. So the doctor's initial recommendation was to amputate above the elbow. The only reason I still have an arm is fate, serendipity, luck, God, whatever you want to call it. But the head orthopedic surgeon at Bethesda at that time was a former SEAL by the name of Dan Valeg. And Dan said, we're not taking his arm. I'm going to save his arm. And I think his entire team disagreed with him. But man, you guys, yeah, I'm not great, but I can do a lot, I try and do more than the average person out there with what I've got. And I'm just thankful for that. And I wouldn't have an arm if it wasn't for Dan. But there were hard times. I won't lie. I felt like to be facially disfigured is really hard. You go out in public, we all look at each other's faces. And even today, I get a lot of attraction. You know, people look at me, kids stare at me a lot because my face looks different. There's something wrong with it. They can tell there's scars, my eyes a little off. But go back to the beginning, I mean, I looked really rough. So that was hard, going out in public and dealing with that. I got frustrated after a period of time. What started happening is after my 8 weeks inpatient, I started doing outpatient. And they, you know, thanks to the SEAL teams and connections we have and a little bit of my own endeavors, I ended up connecting to some of the best surgeons in the world to rebuild my face and nose. But that required a lot of travel. I was, you know, fly, go have a surgery, you know, fly pre-op, come back, fly surgery, 2 or 3 week recovery, come home, recover, and then repeat the process for multiple years. A lot of setbacks. Battlefield injuries are really dirty. So frequently infection sets in, and I had all kinds of infection problems with my face. So this nose they built me is actually the third nose. The first 2 failed, and they totally had to cut it out and start over. And that was really hard. I mean, at a certain period, like literally I just had a hole in my face, and you know, I used to go around with a piece of gauze. I often joke I look like Skeletor. And you know, that's no wonder Skeletor's so damn angry, right? You know, finally, we gained traction, but no, man, there were a lot of dark, hard moments. I won't lie. But I also frequently tell people, you know, what's interesting is the leadership failure set me up for success for this. I don't think I would have done as well out of it if I had not been through, like, that's the hardest journey I've ever been through. Most people think like, oh, you were wounded, like that must be the hardest. No, being told you're a failure, you don't belong in our community is the hardest thing I ever went through. So the good news is it set me up for success later. So I try and tell people that. I'm like, hey man, you know, it sucks when we go through hard moments in this life, but also know that it may be preparing you for something bigger that's coming that you don't know. So, you know, be thankful, try and grind through it. Yes, it will be hard. And it was. I mean, 4 years, 40 surgeries, a lot of setbacks. And that was the physical injuries. I mean, you talk about the mental and the alcohol. Yes. Probably 3 years after my injuries, I was almost healed. I'd launched a nonprofit, you know, once again, driven, like, I don't know. I don't think I created this nonprofit because I wanted to prove something. I created it because I wanted to help other guys from the things that I went through. But in that process, really struggling and really started fighting a lot of the invisible demons in my head from war, not sleeping, kind of reliving the firefight. You know, my career being thrown off course, I had kind of come to grips by that point that I was never going to be operational again, that this was the best they could do, which, you know, really limits, I mean, for operational purposes, not being able to use this arm to grab gear and things like that. I mean, it's really hard for me to buckle a helmet. That kind of stopped me from being operational. So I think all that settled in, and yeah, I kind of started pushing everybody away. My wife, my kids, and, you know, drinking a lot. And thankfully my wife, and we have a relationship book coming out next year. Cause man, we have been through the ringer, and we are strong. And a lot of the lessons, we wrote down a lot of the lessons and things we've done in our marriage. And one of those things was, you know, communicating even through the tough times. And she was like, hey, like, you need to go get help. Like, you know, I can't help you. You're unwilling to let me. She's like, but if we had never, ever, ever mentioned divorce, like it was like a unwritten rule, we would never say it. Like never in a fight was it ever brought up. And that was the only time in our entire marriage to date or before this when she said, this is how our marriage can end if you are unwilling to seek help. And like that woke me up. And I said, okay. So I went and saw the command chaplain and the command psych, and I said, I need help. So that helped me, got better. I still drink occasionally. Not much anymore. I enjoy a drink hanging out with friends and family. But it doesn't, I don't drown myself in the bottle or anything like that anymore.
Wow. So then how did you go from that to wanting to help people? Obviously you set up the nonprofit, but was there something that sparked that, Obviously you was grateful to be alive, but some people take that and run with it and that's it. What was the reason for trying to help people?
I just saw, one of the things that initially led to the nonprofit, I could not wear regular clothing in the beginning. I had all this hardware, trach and tubes. And, I'd been deployed for 7 months wearing military clothes. I just wanted to wear like my own stuff. And the hospital would give me like some donated clothing that, had Velcro, but the Velcro like scratched. And, it's like this ugly ass shirt that no one ever would have worn. I already felt bad enough. And like now you're giving me this clothing that makes me look like a clown. So that became the initial drive for my nonprofit. It was called Wounded Wear, and we just wanted to provide guys with clothing that looked cool, that gave a reason. The original Wounded Wear clothing was pretty in your face. It said, "Stop staring. I got shot by a machine gun. It would have killed you." So those were the original shirts I made that I was wearing. Now I was like, all right, maybe I need to tone this down a bit and make it a little more patriotic. And so the original shirt that we made for Wounded Warriors said, "Scarred so that others may live free." And we made those shirts, and then we, worked to modify clothing as necessary. We paid for clothing modifications for guys, and that's just how it grew. I mean, it was out of my own experience that I wanted to help other guys. And we grew it, over a 10-year period into a $3 million organization. We finally decided in 2018 to phase it down for a lot of different reasons, but we had evolved from Wounded Wear into the Combat Wounded Coalition, and I was just getting burnt out. A nonprofit is a very difficult thing. I did not do a good enough job growing it into a medium to large size organization. We were a mom and pop that grew into a small to medium, and we really needed to grow more. And some of the decisions I made in the beginning, which I learned a lot. I learned a lot in business. You want to learn a lot in business? Go run a nonprofit organization. The level of transparency, the level of money management, the level of cash flow, managing people from volunteers to employees and all that. I learned a lot. I didn't do it all right. I messed a lot up. But I also made mistakes in not hiring someone to help us with raising money from the beginning. And now I tell anybody, if you run a nonprofit, that's the number one hire you should have. Because I was the main driving force behind the fundraising behind the organization. And that'll burn you out. I started to feel like, God, every friend I meet or anybody I meet with money, all I think about is how do I get a donation out of this person? I was just like, man, I don't want to continue to live this way. And not only that, the other thing that brought it to a close, which has led me down the path for CTE and TBI, I started losing friends to suicide. And 2016, one of my mentors killed himself. 2018, a good friend of mine that was supposed to go through our leadership program killed himself. I was seeing other guys. 2013, another teammate had killed himself. So I thought back to that. And I started to think, like, what am I doing? I'm providing clothing. I'm providing events. How is that helping guys who are struggling up here? That's kind of my biggest fear. Like, hey, I give a guy clothing and he goes and kills himself in it, because what did I really do for him? So all of that made me decide to phase that down and get more involved in the TBI, PTSD side. So now I'm on the board for Concussion Legacy Foundation, which there are two sides of this war we fight right now, losing veterans to suicide. One side is psychological. There's a lot of programs that are trying their best to work with them. And what I try and tell any wounded warrior, guy who's listening, who's had trauma, there's a lot of different things that can help. But what works for you may not work for me. And what works for him may not work for either of us. So like you have to go try different things. And what I frequently see with guys struggling through trauma is they'll try one thing and be like, that didn't work. And they'll go back to drinking or drugs or just. So I had tried several things, but what I've come to find is there's a physiological aspect that we don't understand yet. We understand it. We can't diagnose it, we can't treat it, and we can't cure it. So that's why I got involved in Concussion Legacy Foundation, because, how do we prevent that for the future? We don't want to send young men and women off to war to train for war, and to come to find out 10, 20 years later, we're killing them because of the way we train and the blast exposure and all these things that has happened to them. So that'll be the future. So that was a nonprofit. And then somewhere along that path, being in the nonprofit, I had to speak a lot. I began to realize, wow, there's a lot of power in my story and in these words. And that kind of led me down the path of public speaking.
What was the first time you realized that there was a reaction to that it was having an impact on people?
It actually started in the military. I got asked to speak at commands and events because the sign on the door had gotten there's a lot of tension around that got national exposure. When finally my name got out there and, I realized I wouldn't be operational anymore, I did interviews, so that generated some awareness and support. And I think the real aha moment came, I had spoke at a nonprofit event, and there was an individual there who ran a for-profit company and just said, hey, would you be willing to come out to an event I'm doing? And I was active duty, so I asked, and they said, well, you're not allowed to get paid. There's a thing in the military and federal government, you technically can't make money off your story while you're still employed by the federal government. So, but they said, hey, if you want to go and they cover your travel, you can do that. So they did. They flew me and Erica out to Vegas for this big company event, an amazing people. Put us up in probably one of the nicest suites I've ever been in. And I was like, wow, there is power in this. So that started that path. The book, I never intended to write a book, but because I had to write to communicate in the beginning, I had like 200 pages of notes that was all about Iraq. And there was something that I started doing after surgeries, was writing, whether it was the notes I originally had or later it turned to typing. But it was about the failures I had in Afghanistan and the mistakes I made and the leadership lessons that I learned along the way. So people read that. Friends of mine read it and said, you should do something with this. And, books in the SEAL teams were kind of a double-edged sword. There had been people that had written some books that the SEAL teams weren't that happy about. So I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm the guy that screwed up. The last thing I want to do is have the community, be like, screw that guy. He was a fuck up back then. So I went to our Master Chief and at the command I was at the time, and I said, hey, I have this. I have a lot of people say I should do something with it. What do you think? And he read it and he got back to me. He gave it to our commanding officer, who looked it over and read it and said, hey, we think this is good. It's humble. It's your story. You're not talking about classified things. You're talking about a leadership journey you went through. So let's send it up to the headquarters command. So that's how it ended up becoming a book. It's been an interesting road. I am not I'm envious of people that have a business mind that just see opportunity and they immediately like, there's an opportunity here. Let me take it. I am not that way. I feel like I'm a super slow learner. Like it takes me a while to be like, oh man, I should have done this. Although I am running, I am the turtle in the race and I am continuing to do really well. And I just continue to grind, which has been the story of my life. I mean, I think we come full circle. I mean, we're under construction in here and I think I'm still under construction and learning and growing along the way. I used to want to be, I don't know, huge millionaire and all these things. And we accomplished the millionaire status, maybe a year ago. And it didn't make me feel like, wow, I'm so great. It just became a thing, and I know there are people out there like, screw you, I can't believe you would say that. Like it is amazing. And I want to leave a legacy for my kids and I want to continue to give back. And I took all that money and I invested it in this building and in real estate. So what's funny is I'm asset rich and I can barely afford, the rent and payroll right now as we're building things, but I'm okay with that. Because I understand it's part of the growth. And as I turn 49 next week, I've come to realize that I do not have it all figured out, especially me. You would think that after everything I've been through, like I got it figured out. And in some ways I do. I have the formula for success and I have a tremendous superpower to be able to ignore the negativity that so many people are not able to ignore, to get off that X, as I say. And that is a superpower. And I am super fortunate and blessed. But it also can be really exhausting to run through your life having this negative static in the back of your mind every day, every minute, every second, telling you you're not good enough. You're never going to be there. That $1 million doesn't matter. This building doesn't matter. You're a skinny runt. Never going to really be successful. So that's brought me full circle to figure out I need to become content with who I am. And I think that takes me to the next level.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I was going to ask you the definition of success, but I think just trying to reach contentment, I think, is a nice note to end on there. That was such a wonderful journey through your story. So thank you so much.